the impact of tech innovation for better or for worse. For some answers, join me for the first part of the discussion. We have two people giving us fresh examples. We have Duncan Clark, who is the chairman of BDA China and author of the book, Alibaba, the House That Jack Ma Built. Also joining us in Beijing, Enoch Chao, general manager of Trike Bicycles. Welcome to both of you. You have examples coming from very different directions. Enoch, you are bringing traditional bicycle mating into lifestyle.
Yes. So the bike is a 200-year-old invention, but in China, most people know how to ride, but we ride for transportation. So the biggest we like to use innovation to try to get more people to ride, but for fun, to ride as a lifestyle. So
how are you using innovation to do that?
We're using innovation besides our product. First of all, obviously our product. We have different grades of light carbon products. But really the innovation part I'm talking about is using the social media, the prevalence of social media in China to get more people to know about the great riding that they don't know that exists in China, about other groups that are riding, about kids programs that
Traditional
are riding.
industry going innovative, at least on social media platforms.
Correct.
What about Alibaba? I mean, Duncan, you've been embedded in Alibaba for several years in order to get that book done. So what about that? These kind of unicorns, how much are they really bringing us new things in innovation?
Well, they themselves are big investors in technology, of course, within the company.
Sure.
But they also buy companies, of course, externally. They also seed other companies. And don't forget, there's now tens of thousands of alumni of both Alibaba and Tencent who themselves are founding companies. So if you take the whole ecosystem, Alibaba and Tencent, and to some extent Baidu, are a huge part of what's happening in this. And the question is this too much? What's the future? Are they too dominant?
I'm glad you're asking that question for me. So the answer is?
Well, there's potentially a risk of innovation diminishing if we see monopolies developing. It's very interesting. The Chinese government has quite an interesting view towards these companies. They can work with them in some cases, but they can also pressure them. So it's going to be a very interesting balancing act to see how the private sector and the state and this new mixed economy model will coexist.
What about that mixture that Duncan has been talking about, Enoch?
The mixture, so for us, we're obviously focused more on the consumer product. We are seeing more and more government policies and more government push for more healthier lifestyle, more outdoor. So for us, the mixture of government, the mixture of companies, the mixture of the consumers, I think brings about...
But come on, not everything is so rosy, right? I mean, if you think about the bicycle industry, if there is still an industry of bicycles here in China, shared economy has brought a lot of shared bicycle businesses onto the streets here in China.
Absolutely.
But there's an oversupply, and people are complaining about the traffic as a result of more bicycles being put disorderly onto the street. Nobody is really managing it. So what about that pain point that we are talking about here?
Right. So there are two pain points. I think one is the transportation market. In China, we have congested roads, we have pollution. So I look at bike sharing as a great way of solving some of those problems. But like anything else in China, we scale probably too quickly. So that's one.
Very diplomatic in saying that.
So that's one pain point. The other pain point really that we're trying to bring in, at least our brand trying to bring into China, is this pain point of exercise, the pain point of a social, of a lifestyle that you find in other markets.
I think what you have brought up is interesting point. Duncan, I want to go to you on that. That is whether an industry or a trend or even a fad can continue to innovate itself so that continuously addressing the pain points. Earlier, there was lack of bicycles.
That's right.
There's big pollution problem. But now there's an oversupply of bicycles. So how to innovate and the speed of it to keep up with it?
Well, this is the network effect. Everybody wants to be number one. WeChat won with Tencent because everybody's on that platform. Alibaba won in e-commerce. So the bike companies, and there are not just the two we talk about, Ofo and Mobike. In Shanghai, I think it's like 15 or 20 of them. They're in this survival of the fittest.
The only problem is that there's not enough color for the
bikes.
bikes.
That's right. They're running out of colors. They have gold and silver.
That's
so
right.
It's is this healthy or unhealthy? It may be healthy for people. It is good to see people getting back on bikes. For the investors, you want to be number 1, 2, 3. Beyond that, but failure is part of innovation. The big question is when government
But
gets
you don't want to
involved.
be the one who fails.
If you're a civil servant working for the government and it fails, not a good idea. So the role of the private sector is important. Investors are happy to spray and pray. You know, they can invest a number of different vehicles or bicycles and hope that one will work. For government, it's a different story. So this is the balancing act.
Yeah, the balancing act is not a very easy balance to take, particularly if you think about, you used to work in the international corporate culture, right?
Yes.
And you see that the Chinese government is trying to manage so many things,
Yes.
but at the same time, there has been grassroots kinds of innovation going on at the same time, but speed is amazing. So how to balance all of these factors at the same time for business like yours, for investor like the ones you know, how to work that out,
I think it takes time. I think
Come on, you could say that to anything.
I
Right?
think you do, but at the end of the day, like I said, we're a 200-year-old product, if you will, and we're making a comeback. We're making a comeback into people's lives, and it's just
Taking
different
time
phases.
to do what?
It gives time. People's basic needs right now are for example, in China, probably they need to get to work. They need to get to school. Therefore, the bike is what they need. But as the middle class continues to grow in China, then the desire is less about getting to work. It's about getting healthier. It's about spending time more with their family. There's a joke in Chinese about only the rich people are being vegetarians now. So that's what I mean by time.
Well, I just had a vegetarian meal for the dinner, but I'm not rich. But anyway, there are exceptions. Duncan, what about you? You talk about the balance, government, private sector, the needs of the people, and whether the innovation is continuous and fast enough to really address those needs. What exactly is your observation? Are we getting there?
Well, I think one thing that's very interesting is like from the tech sector, from the internet, there's been a spread of this entrepreneurial culture into all areas of the Chinese economy. And investors are following into non-tech areas because, frankly, oversupply of capital. But there's an excitement about this emerged, we can now say, middle class on a scale that we've never seen, particularly the data that's coming, the data technology. So investors are very excited about China being a lab, actually, on an unprecedented scale in areas like AI. And so there are lots of areas which are linked to tech and others that's more the spirit of tech spreading into the real economy.
If you use the word lab, there is the advantage that you could do things in front of everybody. However, there's also the disadvantage that there might be bigger danger facing your market. And think about the size of the market. It could be something dramatic. Duncan.
Well, one of the reasons we're seeing some of these Chinese tech companies going overseas is perhaps they are also concerned if there was a downturn in China in their sector. And so what's very interesting now is we see Silicon Valley companies and we see Chinese companies bumping up against each other in third markets like Southeast Asia and India. And eventually the big question is, when do they bump up against each other in each other's markets?
Before we take a break, I do want to have one sentence from the both of you to sum up your point. Are we really having the right kinds of innovation? Is the innovation really catching up with what people are really requiring these days?
Innovation by definition is something new. So I don't think it's a race. I think as markets grow, as people's needs, sometimes people don't know what they need. And that to me is the definition of innovation.
I see. Duncan.
Yeah, most innovation is incremental, small steps, combining things in new ways. It's not all invention, the eureka moment, but we would like to think of eureka. But it's actually a lot of small things. Yeah, small things that can make the most money actually in this market. Yeah.
That's true. Duncan Clark, Yinao Chao, what a pleasure to have both of you. Hope you will come back once again for our discussion. You're watching World Insight with Tianwei. Stay with us. We'll be back right after this break. Talk about innovation in China. You're watching World Insight with Tianwei, talking about the Chinese innovation. So how can the Chinese tech industry become more competitive around the world? Is it about a lot of investment or is it about something else? To find out further our discussion, we have John here with us, John Wu, who is the Vice President of AI Institute of Sinovation Ventures. Welcome. Also join us in the United States, Doug Kennedy, author of the report, The Fat Tech Dragon, and the director of the project on Chinese business and political economy with CSIS. Scott, it's all your fault that we are talking about this today. But, seriously, this is a big issue. That's an interesting analogy you put out there. Exactly what do you mean? Explain.
Sure. Well, I know in China, fat, chunky babies are considered good, but a fat tech dragon is only partially healthy. It means that you've got a lot of inputs, people, manpower, money going in, but not being digested or metabolized very efficiently. And so you are having a tremendous amount of innovation, as Duncan and your first guest described, and as we'll hear in this segment.
Right.
But there's a lot of waste as well. And that's a natural part of the invention process, but there's probably more waste than needs to be. And the purpose of innovation isn't just to make our lives better, it's to raise the productivity of society. And if it's not done efficiently enough, then you're kind of sticking in place, even though there are a lot more shiny objects around.
Whether efficient or not, we want to take a look at some numbers in terms of why China is considered, quote, a fat tech dragon, according to Scott, at least. We need to look at some of the abundant inputs that China gets. Although China spent 1.55 trillion yuan on R&D in the year 2016, 85% is on the development, only 5% is on research, while another 10% went to research on applications. And according to you, Scott, that is going to be making a fat tech dragon. But I'm not sure whether John Wu here, sitting in the Beijing studio, would agree with you. John, what would you say?
Well, in the past 10 years, has been a tremendous change happening in our society.
That's true.
Right. Our life has been totally changed. Right. For example, Beijing or China has already been one of the best places living without cash. Right. Talking about innovation, 10 years ago, more impactful innovation happened in the big companies, big organizations. But in the past 10 years, startups are making great impact.
But what about the efficiency of it?
Talking about startups, we're lean, right? We're agile. We're trying our ideas in the minimum cost with the real world. So in this case, anyone can have an idea, anyone can apply it to the real world and test it.
Is that the most efficient way to do it, do you think?
That's right.
All
we
right.
have to do it.
Well, Scott, you know what? I think John is trying to say in a very diplomatic way, you guys in the United States just jealous of us, right? We got so many startups over here in China. We got a lot of development. You guys just jealous. What would you say to the point that John
I've got
made?
a lot of faith in John and his team.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I'm certain that they have a very high success rate in terms of the initiatives that they start. Of course, there's lots of failures, and a lot of the efforts in say, for example, batteries in electric vehicles or in semiconductors, they won't turn out well. You've got this rush of so much money from so many different places, and the system to go through and find out what works and what doesn't work is still not efficient enough in China. So I do think that there is a glass half full story to tell here, but you want to make it as productive as possible and have more stories like Sinovision rather than fewer of them.
Right, but how do you make it productive? I guess that's the question. There's a lot of cash going around here in this part of the world, John. You know that more than anyone else. There's even a joke that if you throw a flower pot from the 18th floor, the one who's going to hit by it will be an investor on the street, right?
Oh, really?
So anyway, it's an exaggeration, but it shows a lot of money is in the market. So how to make sure that process is going to be as efficiently as possible?
I think that firstly, we have to give money to the right people. Right? The right team will have the best way to execute, to make their dreams come true. And secondly, every team would choose their own way to test their ideas.
And then?
And then, in that kind of team, certainly it does not only need businessmen, but also it needs people who can really generate the best ideas, like designers, entrepreneurs, and to make that happen.
Well, that of course is on the design level, but what about is on the technical level rather. But what about some of the deeper issues? For example, intellectual property. How much China is really creating it, how innovative those ideas are. Secondly, what about those investments, whether they are being put efficiently into real projects that are addressing what the previous guest in the studio talking about, which is the pain points. And thirdly, how are those likely to be applied elsewhere in the world? Can China businesses these days be innovative not just in its own market, but also elsewhere? John.
Yeah, I think in the past 10 years, a lot of things has happened. Like for example, because the mobile internet is totally based on the lifestyle of the local people. And so Chinese people can really generate some ideas and really test them and make into solid business based on their own lives. And in the past, we have to copy. But in this case, we can have our own things.
That's a great point over there, Scott, because John is arguing, you know what? Innovation is happening on this earth, this part of the world, here in China, because we know this local market. Of course, when you are saying all these bigger issues of how applicable elsewhere in the world, that's not what we're thinking about. We're just thinking about Chinese market, and that's big enough, Scott.
Well, certainly the Chinese market is a great test bed for innovative ideas and products. Having economies of scale lets you scale up, commodify, get returns. It also provides an amazing amount of data for your products. So for